good evening, or good morning, depending on when you found this. Tonight's story is meant to be listened to slowly, in the dark, with rain or fire sounds in the background. Before we begin, I'm curious, where are you listening from? And what made you press play tonight? If you enjoy this kind of storytelling, subscribe and click the notification bell to stay connected. The floorboards in the hallway groaned again. I counted the seconds between steps 1, 2, 3, silence. Then the soft press of weight on wood. I was inside the master bedroom closet. The door pulled shut, except for a hairline gap I could press my eye against. The light under the bedroom door was gone. Not turned off, but swallowed. The footsteps stopped exactly where I knew the bed was. I could hear breathing now, slow and wet, like someone trying to clear a throat full of cotton. I pressed my palm against my mouth, so hard my teeth bit into the skin. The breathing stopped. Then something tapped the closet door. Once, a single, deliberate knock. I didn't answer. I didn't move. The moonlight spilled across my sneakers, and I watched the dust motes hang frozen in the beam. The tap came again, harder. The wood vibrated against my shoulder blade. I stayed in that closet for 4 hours. The tapping never repeated after the second one. But I heard something else, the sound of the bedroom door closing. Soft, deliberate, like someone didn't want to wake a sleeping child. Then the footsteps retreated down the hall, into the guest room, into the bathroom, into the room my aunt used for her sewing. The house settled into that hollow silence old houses have, the kind where your own heartbeat sounds like a drum someone else is playing. When dawn bled through the crack, I pushed the door open. The bedroom was exactly as I'd left it. Bed made, nightstand organized, water glass on a coaster. The bedroom door was wide open. It had been closed when I crawled into the closet at 3:33 a.m. I checked every room. Nothing was moved. Nothing was taken. But the sewing room door was shut. And I never shut that door. My name is Maya Chen. I'm 28. And I freelance as a graphic designer for a branding agency in Detroit. I moved to Bloomfield Hills 4 months ago to house sit for my aunt while she took a year-long contract in Singapore. She lives in a mid-century modern house on the corner of Lone Pine and Franklin. A neighborhood so quiet you can hear the sprinklers click on 3 streets over. On paper, it was the perfect arrangement. Free rent, a furnished home, and the quietest workspace I'd ever had. My flaw, and I know it now, is that I need control. I need the towels folded along the crease. I need the spice rack alphabetical. I need to know exactly where everything is. Because if I don't, my brain refuses to settle. The first 3 weeks were perfect. I'd wake at 6 a.m., make pour-over coffee, and work until the light turned golden through the birch trees. I didn't even think about the old house settling at night. The first incident happened on a Tuesday. I was working late, past midnight, trying to nail a logo revision for a client in Tokyo. I heard a door close somewhere in the house. Not slam, not creak, a solid, deliberate click of a latch catching. I assumed my aunt's cat, though I knew the cat was dead. It took me a second to remember my aunt had no pets. I checked the house. Every door was open except the sewing room. I opened it. Empty. The sewing machine was covered. The mannequin stood in the corner with its arm raised. I closed it again and went to bed. The next morning, that door was shut again. I started keeping a log. Night 1, the sewing room door closed itself. Night 2, a single footprint in the bathroom barefoot, size 9 or 10, pressed into the bath mat like someone had stood there for a long time. Night 3, I woke up at 3:33 a.m. and my bedroom closet door was open. I never opened it before bed. I always check. On night 6, I set up a camera, a simple baby monitor I bought at the Walmart on Telegraph Road, pointed at the hallway from the living room. I reviewed the footage at 6 a.m. At 3:33 a.m. exactly, the sewing room door swings open. The motion light didn't trigger. The cat there was no cat, didn't trigger it. The door simply opened, stayed open for 47 seconds, then closed. The gap was wide enough for a person to step through. I watched it 12 times, frame by frame. The lighting didn't change. No shadow, no figure, just a door opening to an empty room. I called my aunt that morning. I tried to sound casual. Hey, does the house make a lot of noise at night? The wood shifting, she laughed. She said, Maya, that house is built like a bomb shelter. Nothing moves in there. I asked about the previous owners. She paused. She said, why do you ask? I told her about the door. She got quiet, then said, the man who built the house died in 1985. Heart attack. They found him in the master bedroom closet. I should have left. Every rational part of my brain told me to pack a bag, drive to a Motel 6 on Woodward Avenue, and let the real estate agent handle the rest. But I couldn't. Not because I was brave. I was the opposite. I was obsessive. I needed to understand the pattern. The man died in the closet. The closet where I'd hidden. The door I'd seen open at exactly 3:33 a.m. I started researching. The man's name was Harold Vance. He was a retired architect, widowed, lived alone. The coroner ruled it a myocardial infarction, but the police report, which which I found through a digitized archive of the Oakland Press, noted something odd. His body was found in a crouched position, knees pulled to his chest, arms wrapped around his legs. He was inside the closet, with the door closed, and his eyes were open. The responding officer wrote, "Subject appeared to have been hiding." Hiding from what? The report didn't speculate. The case was closed in 3 days. I couldn't stop reading. I found a blog post from 2012, written by a woman who rented the house for a summer. She described the same thing. Doors closing, footsteps at 3:33 a.m. The sense of being watched from the sewing room. She wrote, "I woke up one night and saw a man standing in the bedroom doorway. He was just standing there, still as a photograph. I blinked and he was gone." The comments were disabled. The blogger's last post was dated 3 weeks into her stay. She never updated again. I checked obituaries for her name. Nothing. I checked property records. The house had been sold 4 times since 1985. Each owner stayed less than 2 years. I called a real estate agent I knew from a past project. She told me off the record that the house had a reputation, something about the midnight guest. She laughed when she said it, but her voice went tight. She said, "Don't stay there alone, Maya. That house eats people." I told her I was fine. The next night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, a kitchen knife on the coffee table, and the baby monitor screen showing a static shot of the hallway. At 3:33 a.m., the sewing room door cracked open. I saw it on the monitor. I looked up at the actual hallway. The door was open, not all the way, just a crack, wide enough for someone to peer through. The light in the sewing room was off. I stared at the crack for what felt like an hour. No one came out. No one went in. I finally stood up, walked to the door, and pushed it fully open. The room was empty, but the mannequin, the one my aunt used for sewing, had been moved. It stood 3 feet to the left of where it had been that morning. Its arm was no longer raised. It was pointing at the closet. My closet, the master bedroom closet. Here's where I need to ask you something directly. Think about this. If that happened to you, what would you do? Would you open the closet? Would you leave the house? I did neither. I stood in that sewing room, staring at the mannequin, and I felt something I can only describe as the opposite of fear, a kind of hollow recognition, like the house had been waiting for me to notice. I closed the sewing room door, walked back to the living room, and sat down. I didn't sleep. At 6 a.m., I went to the master bedroom. The closet door was wide open. Inside, the clothes were pushed to either side, creating a space in the center. A space exactly the size of a crouching person. The floor was cold. I knelt down and pressed my palm against the wood. It was damp, like someone had been sweating there for hours. I swabbed the moisture with a paper towel. It wasn't water. It was clear, slightly oily, and smelled faintly of copper. I didn't know what that meant, but I bagged it anyway, like a detective on a crime show. I called my aunt again. She didn't answer. I left a voicemail asking about the mannequin, about the previous owners, about anything she hadn't told me. She called back 2 hours later. Her voice was strange, not angry, not scared, but careful. She said, "Maya, I didn't tell you this because I didn't want to scare you. But the man who built the House Herald, he had a daughter. She died in the house when she was 6, drowned in the bathtub. He found her. He never recovered. Some people say he stayed in the house because he thought she would come back." The clock on the nightstand read 3:33 a.m. when Alina Vasquez realized she hadn't blinked in over 12 minutes. Her eyes burned, dry and raw, but her body refused to obey the simple command to close them. She stood in the doorway of room 214 at the Coral Castle Motel in Homestead, Florida, and watched the television play static across every surface of the room's walls. The ceiling, the mirror above the dresser, the whites of her own eyes reflected back at her. The man on the bed had stopped breathing 5 minutes ago. She knew this because she'd counted the seconds since his last exhale. 247 seconds of absolute stillness. And yet, she couldn't make herself move, couldn't look away, couldn't scream. The static whispered to her in a voice that sounded almost like her mother's. And that was the worst part, familiarity of it. The way it felt like coming home to a house that had been burning for hours. Officer Marcus Delgado found Alina at 4:17 a.m., still standing in that doorway. He would later describe her as present, but not there, a phrase that would haunt him for months afterward. The body on the bed belonged to Lawrence Chen, aged 46, an investment analyst from Tampa, who had checked into the motel alone 3 nights earlier. No signs of struggle, no forced entry. The coroner would rule it a massive cerebral aneurysm. Natural causes, case closed. But Marcus saw something the coroner missed. Every mirror in that room had been covered with torn bedsheets. The television was unplugged from the wall. The cord coiled neatly on the floor. Yet the screen still glowed with that same empty static. And on the nightstand, next to the clock frozen at 3:33, lay a single photograph. It showed Alina Vasquez at age 8, standing in her grandmother's kitchen in Little Havana. The same static pattern flickering behind her, in the window glass. She had never seen that photograph before in her life. Alina Vasquez was 28 years old, a sleep therapist with a small private practice in Coral Gables. And she was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. For 6 months, she had been documenting a pattern she couldn't explain. Patients who came to her with chronic insomnia were reporting the same thing. They would wake at exactly 3:33 a.m. every single night without fail. They described a sensation of being watched, of hearing faint static from electronic devices that weren't on. Some of them started calling her in the middle of the night, terrified, their voices cracking as they whispered about shapes in the darkness that moved like television snow given form. Alina prided herself on being rational. She had a degree in clinical psychology from the University of Miami. She believed in neural pathways and circadian rhythms and the power of cognitive behavioral therapy. But rationality has a breaking point, and she was standing right at the edge of hers. Her practice occupied the second floor of a converted medical building on Ponce de Leon Boulevard. At night, when the last patient left and the cleaning crew finished their rounds, the building settled into a silence so complete that Alina could hear her own heartbeat. She had never been afraid of the dark, never believed in ghosts or curses or anything she couldn't measure. But recently, she had started staying later than necessary, reviewing case files she had already memorized, because going home meant lying in her own bed and waiting for that clock to hit 3:33. Her personality flaw, the one thing she had never been able to fix about herself, was a desperate need to explain everything, to reduce mystery to mechanism, to find the cause beneath the effect. This need had made her an excellent therapist, but it was now becoming something else entirely, an obsession that pulled her deeper into a pattern she could not control. The journal belonged to a patient named Diane Reyes, a 34-year-old school teacher who had been in Alina's care for 3 months. Diane had started coming to therapy after her husband found her standing over their infant daughter's crib at 3:33 in the morning, completely unresponsive, her eyes wide open, but seeing nothing. The journal contained page after page of scribbled notes, all written during these episodes. Diane never remembered afterward. Most of the notes were nonsense, strings of unrelated words, but one phrase appeared with disturbing frequency. The signal is breaking through. Alina had showed this journal to 3 colleagues, all of whom suggested sleepwalking or a dissociative disorder. But Alina noticed something they didn't. The handwriting changed. On the earlier pages, the script was shaky, but recognizable as Diane's. By the final entries, the letters had become precise, mechanical, and completely unlike any sample of Diane's writing Alina had ever seen. Alina bought a small television from a thrift store in Hialeah and set it up in her waiting room. She told herself it was for research, that she wanted to understand the static phenomenon her patients described. But the truth was simpler and stranger. She wanted to see if it would happen to her. The television was a late 1980s model with rabbit ears and a manual dial, the kind of set that had sat in her grandmother's living room when she was a child. She plugged it in, tuned it to an empty channel, and left it running. For 3 days, nothing unusual occurred. The screen displayed harmless gray static, the gentle hiss of white noise. On the 4th night, Alina fell asleep in her office chair at 2:47 a.m. She woke at exactly 3:33 to find the static had changed. It was no longer random. It formed patterns, shapes, almost recognizable faces that dissolved before her eyes could focus on them. The faces in the static reminded Alina of something she had tried very hard to forget. When she was 7 years old, her grandmother had taken her to see a woman in a cramped apartment behind a botanica on Cal Ocho. The woman was called La Vidant, the seer, and she had stared at young Alina for a long time before speaking. Esta niña vilo, que no debería existir, she said. This child sees what should not exist. Alina's grandmother had crossed herself and pulled her granddaughter close, and they had left without another word. That night, Alina had dreamed of a television screen filling an entire room, the static pouring out like water, drowning everything in gray light. She had not thought about that dream in over 20 years. Now, standing at her office window at 4 a.m., watching the rain streak down the glass, she wondered if she had ever really woken up from it. Alina began to document her own episodes. She set up a camera in her bedroom, pointed at her bed, programmed to record continuously from 3:00 a.m. to 4:00 a.m. The first night's footage showed her sleeping normally. The second night showed her sitting up in bed at exactly 3:33, her eyes open, her mouth moving as if speaking to someone in the corner of the room. The third night's footage was corrupted, not erased, not distorted by technical malfunction, corrupted in a way that suggested the digital file had been overwritten by something that wasn't data. When Alina opened the file, her computer displayed only static, the same flickering gray snow she saw on the television in her waiting room. She played the static for 37 minutes before she realized she could hear voices in it. Her mother's voice, her grandmother's voice, her own voice, but wrong, layered, and metallic, speaking words in a language she did not recognize. Think about this for a moment. If you woke up every single night at exactly the same time to a room full of static that spoke in the voices of everyone you've ever loved, how long would it take before you stopped trusting the difference between waking and dreaming? Alina had stopped trusting it 2 weeks ago. She had stopped trusting everything except the data, the pattern, the inevitable convergence she could feel approaching like a storm she could see on the horizon, but couldn't outrun. She traced the 33 phenomenon backward through her patient records and found something that made her blood run cold. The earliest documented case wasn't Diane Ray's. It wasn't even one of her current patients. The earliest case was her own. She had been hospitalized at age 9 for what doctors called night terrors with auditory hallucinations. The hospital was Jackson Memorial. The time of the episodes was consistently recorded as 3:33 a.m. She had been treating herself her entire career without knowing it. The Coral Castle Motel appeared in 3 separate patient journals before Alina ever visited it. Diane Ray's had drawn a crude map of the motel's layout in the margin of one session. Another patient, a truck driver named Samuel Ortiz, had mentioned it in passing a place. He stopped sometimes on long hauls, a place where the static in his CB radio always cleared to reveal voices that weren't coming from anywhere. Alina drove to Homestead on a Wednesday afternoon. The motel sat at the edge of town, a 2-story structure from the 1950s that had been painted and repainted so many times the original color was unknowable. The parking lot was empty except for a single sedan. The office was locked. The sign above the door read, "No vacancy," in letters that seemed too bright, too sharp, as if they were not painted but burned into the plastic. Alina walked the length of the building and counted 20 rooms. The photograph on the nightstand in room 214, the one showing her at age 8, had been taken in that motel. She could feel it in her bones. The motel manager was a man named Hector Reyes, 63 years old, who had owned the Coral Castle since 1979. He claimed he remembered Alina's grandmother bringing her there in the summer of 1996. Remembered because the girl had walked into room 214 and refused to leave for 3 days. She said the room was talking to her, Hector told Alina. His voice flat, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere behind her head. We had to carry her out. She was screaming about the light behind the television. Alina asked if she could see the registration books from that year. Hector hesitated, then led her to a storage closet piled high with cardboard boxes and yellowed papers. The books were there, hundreds of them, dating back to the 1950s. Alina opened the one marked 1996 and found her grandmother's signature on the second page. Below it, in a child's handwriting, was a single sentence. "I can see them in the snow." The rest of the page was filled with small, precise drawings of face, hundreds of them, each one slightly different, each one watching the viewer with static-filled eyes. The photograph on the office wall showed the motel's grand opening in 1955. A crowd of people stood in front of the building, all of them smiling, all of them dressed in mid-century fashion. But there was something wrong with the shadows. Alina studied the image for 10 minutes before she understood what she was seeing. Every shadow in the photograph fell to the left, away from the afternoon sun, which was physically impossible. The only explanation was that the light source wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the motel, bleeding through the windows, casting the shadows of the people outward like spokes on a wheel. Hector saw her staring at the photograph and said nothing. He simply reached over and turned it face down on the desk. "Some things don't want to be remembered," he said, "but they remember us anyway." Alina asked him what he meant. He looked at her for a long time, and in that look, she saw recognition not of her face, but of something behind it. He had seen her before, not as a child, not as a woman. He had seen her in the static. Alina checked into room 214. That night, against every instinct she had, she told herself it was research, that she needed to understand the source of the pattern, that she could not treat her patients if she could not explain the phenomenon they all shared. She set up her camera in the corner. She placed the television in front of the bed. She unplugged it from the wall, just as she had found it in her vision, and she waited. At 3:33 a.m., the television turned on by itself. The static filled the room, and for the first time, Alina did not look away. She watched the patterns form and dissolve, watched the faces press against the screen from the inside, watched the static begin to crawl across the ceiling like living fog. And then she heard her grandmother's voice, clear as a bell, saying, "Mija, you should have stayed asleep." The static reached her bed, and she felt a cold that was not temperature, a touch that was not physical, a presence that was not alive in any sense she understood. And she understood, finally, that she had never been investigating the phenomenon. The phenomenon had been investigating her. The static did not hurt. That was the most terrible part of it. It felt like coming home after a very long time away. Alina's hand sank into the wall up to her wrist, and she felt the motel around her as if it were a living thing. a body, a nervous system made of signal and noise. She saw every room at once. She saw every guest who had ever stayed here, saw them lying in bed at 3:33 a.m., saw the static pour into their mouths and ears and eyes while they slept. She saw Diane Reyes standing over her daughter's crib, her body empty, her consciousness replaced by. The note was waiting for me on the granite countertop, propped against a salt shaker. I didn't remember moving. It was written in blue ink on a torn piece of lined paper, the kind from a spiral notebook. Welcome, Maya. I hope you like the lavender scent in the bedroom. I put it there just for you. I hadn't told anyone I was coming to Portland. Not my mother, not my boss, not even my roommate. The Airbnb listing said the host lived in Seattle and used a management company, but someone had been inside this apartment while I was out grabbing takeout from the food cart 2 blocks away. The lavender diffuser in the bedroom had been empty when I arrived. Now it was full and humming. I checked the locks again, deadbolt, chain, window latches, all secure. The phone in my hand had no signal, just a spinning circle. I called out, "Hello." The only answer was the refrigerator compressor kicking on. Id booked this place through a third party. Cite the Green Ginger Suite on Southeast 28th Avenue in Portland's Hawthorne district. The photos showed exposed brick, a clawfoot tub, a vintage record player. It looked like a perfect writing retreat. My real reason for coming was simpler. I needed to disappear for 5 days. My job at a branding agency in San Francisco had ground me down 90-hour weeks. A creative director who borrowed my ideas and called them his own. A breakup with a man who'd taken the cat and the couch. I told myself this trip was about resetting, but as I stood at the window, watching the rain soak the vintage street lamps, I felt a cold thread pulling through my ribs. The note wasn't the first thing that felt wrong. Earlier, when Id unlocked the door, the inside deadbolt had been engaged. That was impossible unless someone had been on the other side. Id dismissed it as a maintenance error. Now I wasn't so sure. Backstory: 2 weeks before Portland. I'd been living my normal life in a 1-bedroom apartment in the Mission District. My name is Maya Chen. I am 29, and I am a graphic designer who trusts too easily. That's the flaw, the one people have pointed out since college. I assume the best. I lend my keys to neighbors. I leave my laptop open in coffee shops. I tell strangers my life story on a first date. My mother always said it would get me in trouble. She was right. The Airbnb booking had seemed straightforward. The host's profile was named Julia R., with 5-star reviews and a cheerful bio about loving vinyl records and farmers markets. Id messaged her to ask about early check-in. She replied within 2 minutes, friendly, detailed, included a local bakery recommendation. Julia even sent a PDF guide to the apartment with photos of every room. I felt cared for. That feeling should have been the first alarm. The day I arrived, everything seemed normal. The green ginger suite was on the second floor of a converted Victorian. Olive green walls, a turntable with a Billie Holiday record already on the platter, a kitchen stocked with bone china mugs. I unpacked my bag, took a long shower, and sat on the velvet couch, scrolling through work emails I swore I'd ignore. I even sent a photo to my friend Leo. Base camp established. Wine is chilling. He replied with a skull emoji. By 10 p.m., I was tired. I climbed into the 4-poster bed, the sheets smelling faintly of lavender. I remember thinking how peaceful it was. No traffic, no shouting neighbors, just the occasional creak of old wood settling. I fell asleep quickly. At some point in the night, something woke me. A soft click, like a door latch engaging. I lay still, heart knocking against my ribs, listening. Nothing. I told myself it was the house settling again. I rolled over and forced sleep to take me. In the morning, the deadbolt was thrown. The message arrived at 3:17 a.m. The second night, I saw it when I woke up at 7, groggy from a dream I couldn't remember. The Airbnb app notification read, Julia R. How's the lavender working? I refreshed the diffuser before you arrived. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the notification. That was impossible. The host was supposed to be in Seattle. The management company handled key codes remotely. There was no reason for Julia to be in the apartment, unless she had a hidden entry. I opened the message and read the full text. Hi Maya. I noticed the diffuser was low when I did my walkthrough last week. Hope you're enjoying the suite. Let me know if you need anything. I typed a reply. You were here today. Read receipt. No answer. I checked the hallway. Empty. The front door had a keypad lock with a code ID. Set myself a temporary code sent by the management system. But what if there was a master code? What if Julia or someone else had access anytime they wanted? I started going through every closet, every cupboard, every space where a person could hide. Under the bathroom sink, I found nothing but cleaning supplies and a spare toilet paper roll. In the bedroom closet, a vacuum cleaner and a stack of extra blankets. The kitchen pantries held only spices and a bag of coffee. No secret doors, no trapdoors, no spaces big enough for a person. But I felt watched. The sensation was physical pressure between my shoulder blades, a warmth on the back of my neck, as if someone were standing just behind me. I spun around 3 times. Nothing. By noon, I decided to go out. I'd walk to the coffee shop on Division Street, clear my head, maybe call Leo. I needed a second opinion. As I stepped out the door, I noticed something on the welcome mat. A single lavender sprig, tied with a white ribbon, the kind you'd buy at a farmer's market. No note. I picked it up, turned it over in my fingers. It was still damp, as if placed there within the hour. I dropped it and walked away fast, not looking back. The coffee shop was called Puffin's Roast, a narrow place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu. I ordered a flat white and sat by the window, phone in hand. I called Leo. He picked up on the 3rd ring, his voice rough with sleep. "It's noon here, Maya. What's wrong?" I told him everything: the note, the deadbolt, the 3 a.m. message, the lavender sprig. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "That's not normal. You need to leave. Right now." I argued. It paid for 5 nights. I didn't have the money to just throw away. Besides, what if it was just an overzealous host? A miscommunication. "Trust your gut," Leo said. "You always tell me to trust my gut. So trust it." I promised I'd think about it. But I also couldn't shake the feeling that leaving might make it worse. Whoever was doing this knew I was here. They knew my name, my arrival time, my preference for lavender. They knew enough to get inside without breaking anything. If I left, they'd know that too. I finished my coffee and walked back through the drizzle, the street feeling narrower than before. Back at the green ginger suite, I did something I'd never done before. I pressed my ear to the front door and listened. The hallway was quiet, no footsteps, no voices, no sound of a TV from the neighboring unit. I opened the door a crack and peered out. The hallway was empty. The carpet was a dark burgundy, worn in paths. At the end of the hall, a single window showed the gray sky. I stepped out and walked to the stairwell. The door groaned open. The stairs descended into a dim foyer with a mail slot and a row of buzzers. I checked the mailbox, labeled Green Ginger Suite. Empty. I was about to go back up when I noticed something taped to the underside of the stair railing. A small envelope, my name on it in blue ink. Maya. Inside was a folded piece of paper with a single sentence. Your childhood dog was named Biscuit. He died when you were 12. You still dream about him. Think about this. If that happened to you, would you keep reading? Or would you run and never look back? My hand went cold. Biscuit. I hadn't spoken that name aloud in years. He was a beagle mix with one floppy ear PD been hit by a car in front of our house in Fremont, California. I was 12. Id buried him in the backyard under the lemon tree. I never told anyone outside my immediate family about that dream, the one where Biscuit comes to the foot of my bed, tail wagging, and then slowly disappears into shadow. Id told a therapist once, but that was 10 years ago. Id never mentioned it online, never posted about it, never even written it in a journal that could be found. How could the Airbnb host a stranger know about Biscuit? I looked up the stairwell, half expecting someone to be standing at the top. Nothing. I shoved the note into my pocket and climbed back to the apartment, locking the door behind me with shaking hands. I dialed the management company number from the booking confirmation. It went to a generic voicemail. I left a message asking to speak with Julia directly. My voice sounded thin and reedy, like a child pretending to be brave. I spent the next hour online, digging through everything I could find about Julia R. The Airbnb profile had only 5 reviews, all glowing, but from accounts created in the last 6 months. The names were generic Sarah, Mike, Emily, with no profile photos. I reverse image searched the profile picture. A watercolor flower. Nothing. I searched for Julia R. Portland Airbnb host. No results. I searched for my own name and found nothing unusual. But then I checked my Google account activity. Someone had accessed my Gmail from an IP address in Portland. On the same day I arrived, I hadn't logged in on a public computer. The only place Id used my phone was the apartment. That meant someone had my password, or someone had been inside my phone while I slept. I looked at the device in my hand as if it were a stranger. I changed every password I could think of, but the feeling of violation had already settled into my bones. I realized I didn't even know if Julia R. was a real person. The management company's website had a Portland address, but a quick street view check showed it was a UPS store mailbox. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, a kitchen knife beside me on the couch. Id checked every room, every closet, every window 3 times. Id even pulled the fire escape ladder down from the bedroom window as a potential exit. At around midnight, I heard a noise from the kitchen, a soft tap, like a mug being set down on the counter. I crept to the doorway and peered in. The kitchen was empty. The overhead light was off, but the street lamp outside threw a pale amber glow through the window. On the counter, a new note lay next to the coffee maker. I didn't want to read it, but my feet carried me forward. The note said, "You're scared now. That's okay. It'll wait until you feel safe again. That's when it's best." I crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. Then I took a picture of it with my phone. I tried to send it to Leo, but the message wouldn't deliver. The signal had dropped again. I checked the router. It was plugged in and blinking green, but my phone showed no bars. I tried the landline phone on the nightstand. Dead. I had to get out. I grabbed my bag, shoved in my wallet, phone, charger. I didn't care about the rest. I walked to the front door and punched in the key code. The display flashed red. Invalid code. I tried again, slowly, carefully. Red. I tried the backup code from the email confirmation. Red. Panic rose, a hot wire in my throat. I pulled the chain lock and tried the deadbolt. It wouldn't turn. The lock was frozen. The key stuck halfway. I yanked, twisted, nothing. I was locked in. I went to the window, the fire escape. I slid the window open and crawled onto the metal platform. The ladder was retracted, the release handle missing. Someone had removed it. I looked down 3 stories to the alley. No other option. I climbed back inside and sat on the floor with my back against the door. I could hear my own breathing, too fast, too loud. Then another sound, a soft creak from the bedroom. The door was slowly swinging open, revealing darkness inside. I didn't call out. I just stared, knife in hand, waiting for whatever came next. A shape moved out of the darkness. It was tall, human, but the proportions seemed slightly wrong, the shoulders too narrow, the head too still. It stepped into the sliver of moonlight, and I saw a face I recognized. It was mine. The same jawline, same dark hair pulled back, same eyes. She was wearing the same clothes I'd worn the day before, the gray sweater, the black jeans. She looked at me without expression, then opened her mouth. Maya, you forgot to turn off the lavender diffuser. The voice was mine, but deeper, like a recording slowed down. I screamed and threw the knife. It clattered against the wall, and the figure didn't flinch. It just stood there, my own face staring back at me. And then it began to walk toward me, step by deliberate step, as if it had all the time in the world. I scrambled backward, hit the couch, fell over the armrest. The figure stopped a few feet away, tilting its head as if studying me. You don't understand yet, it said in that wrong voice. I was you once. I took a booking at this same suite 3 years ago. The host gave me lavender. She asked about my childhood. She knew everything. And then she locked the door and showed me how to be free. The thing reached out a hand, palm open. You don't have to fight. You just have to let go. I kicked the coffee table toward her, sending it sliding into her legs. The smell hit me first. Not the musty old house smell I'd expected from a Victorian built in 1898, but something metallic, like copper, and old blood. Id booked this Airbnb in Bisbee, Arizona, for a week of isolation-o clients. No Slack notifications. No roommates, constant true crime podcasts bleeding through my bedroom wall. But 2 hours after I arrived, I was on my knees with a flashlight, pressing my cheek to the floorboards. The stain under the queen bed was the shape of a woman, arms spread, legs slightly apart. It already checked the bathroom, the closet, the miniature kitchen with its peeling yellow linoleum. The host, a woman named Sandra who lived in Phoenix, had called this room the writer's study, but there were no books, only a bare mattress, a chipped porcelain sink, and a shadow in the floor I couldn't scrub away with bleach. I told myself it was just old water damage. Bisbee is a mining townkeeper, silver lead. The whole hill the house sat on was probably laced with ore. The stain could be rust, or iron bacteria, or 100 natural things that had nothing to do with death. I pulled up the booking confirmation on my phone. Sandra had sent a welcome message. Check-in is self-serve. The lockbox code is 1111. Please leave the key inside when you check out. Enjoy your stay. It arrived at 10:47 p.m. and now it was 11:11. The numbers on my screen glowed. I looked out the window above the headboard. The backyard was a steep drop into darkness. The sky so clear I could see the Pleiades, but deeper, past the prickly pear and mesquite, something stood, motionless. I blinked and it was gone. I told myself it was just the angle of the glass. My name is Maya Chen. I am 28, and I work as a graphic designer for a marketing firm in Tucson. The flaw I bring into every room I walk into is a need to control the uncontrollable. I organize my sock drawer by color. I reorder my to-do list 3 times a day, and I cannot sleep if a picture frame is even a degree off level. The Airbnb looked fine online. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, clawfoot tub. The reviews were all 5 stars. Historic charm, perfect for artists, quiet and rejuvenating. But the framed photo on the wall in my bedroom showed a dozen men in dusty hats standing outside a mine shaft, their eyes dark hollows. The frame was tilted. I got up, corrected it, and sat back down. The second I looked away, I heard a soft creak. The frame had shifted back. I took it off the wall and laid it flat on the dresser, face down. I told myself it was just an old house settling. I chose Bisbee because I needed absolute silence. My last project had gone sideways. A branding campaign for a chain of vegan restaurants that the client kept redesigning until every file was a graveyard of rejected versions. Id snapped at my project manager, called her a content vampire, and then spent 3 days apologizing. My therapist suggested a digital detox. So here I was, in a house built before the Titanic sank, with no TV, no Wi-Fi except my phone's hotspot, and the sound of my own breathing. But by midnight, I realized silence isn't quiet. The house had its own vocabulary. The water pipes groaned, the roof timbers popped, and from somewhere downstairs, a rhythmic tapping started slow, deliberate, like someone drumming fingernails against glass. I lay in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The tapping continued for 13 minutes. Then it stopped. I didn't sleep that night. Morning came hazy, the sun struggling through a layer of dust that hung over the town like a cataract. I made coffee in the tiny kitchen and noticed the mug Id used the night before was still on the counter, except Id washed it and put it back in the cupboard. Now it sat rim down, a faint crescent of lipstick on the ceramic. I don't wear lipstick. I checked my phone. No service. The weather radar showed a stationary red blob over Bisbee, but the sky was clear. I tried to call Sandra through the Airbnb app, but the message wouldn't send. I stepped outside onto the wraparound porch. The street was empty. A neighbor's dog stood motionless in its yard, staring at me. I went back inside and locked the door. I decided to explore the house in daylight. The living room held a sagging velvet couch, a fireplace filled with ash, and a mirror so large it dominated the entire wall. I caught my reflection and waved, then froze. The reflection waved back, but a beat too late. I stepped closer. The mirror showed the room behind me. The couch, the fireplace, the door to the hallway. But my own face looked wrong. Not distorted, but like someone had painted a different expression onto Ida Slight's smile I wasn't wearing. I lifted my hand to touch the glass. The reflection raised its hand at the same time, perfectly synchronized this time. I backed away, heart hammering, and didn't look at the mirror again. I spent the rest of the morning in the bathroom, with the door locked, scrolling through saved photos on my phone, pretending I hadn't seen anything. The bathroom was original to the house hexagonal tile, a pedestal sink, a clawfoot tub with brass feet. I ran the tap to wash my face. The water came out clear for a few seconds, then turned a murky brown. I let it run, and it cleared again. But when I looked at the sink drain, tiny particles of dark matter clung to the porcelain. I touched one it smeared gritty, like dried soil or ash. I checked the mirror. Behind me, the shower curtain was pulled closed. I hadn't pulled it closed. I reached back and yanked it open. Nothing, just the tub, white and empty. But the drain in the bottom of the tub was dark. as if something had been lying there recently, blocking the light. I left the bathroom and didn't go back until I needed to brush my teeth that night. By late afternoon, I was desperate for human contact. I walked to the corner cafe on Main Street, but it was closed. The entire street was empty. No cars, no pedestrians, no sound except the wind scraping through the canyon. A piece of paper fluttered past, caught on a cactus. I picked it up. It was a flyer, curled and faded, with a black and white photograph of a woman. Underneath, text read, "Have you seen her? Last seen at the Bisbee Inn, 1898. Reward for information." The woman in the photo had dark hair, high cheekbones, a faint smile. I looked at the flyer for a long time. Her face was the same expression I'd seen in the mirror that morning. I folded it into my pocket and walked back to the house. Think about this: if you found that flyer, would you go back inside, or would you run? Tell me in the comments if you caught what just happened. I sat on the edge of the bed, the flyer spread across my lap. The year 1898 was 125 years ago. The house was built in 1898. I didn't believe in coincidences, but I also didn't believe in ghosts. I'd grown up in a rational household. My father was an engineer, my mother a nurse. The dead are dead. The living are what you need to watch out for. But the house felt alive. The air seemed to press against my skin, and the shadow on the wall behind me, I saw it in my peripheral vision. Two heads, one mine, the other taller, darker, leaning toward my shoulder. I spun around. Nothing. The lamp cast a single shadow of the bedpost. I turned back. The flyer was gone. I'd been holding it a second ago. I checked the floor, the bed, my pockets. Gone. I jumped up and ran to the hallway. The door at the end of the third bedroom, which I'd been told was locked for storage, was now slightly ajar. I hadn't touched it. I approached slowly, my bare feet cold on the wood. The gap was just wide enough to slip a hand through. I pushed the door. It swung open without resistance. Inside was a small room with a single chair facing a corner. The wallpaper was browned and peeling, showing layers of patterns underneath: roses, then stripes, then plain plaster. On the seat of the chair lay a photograph, a woman in a white dress, kneeling in the dirt, her hands bound behind her back. Her face was blurred, but the hair, the cheekbone sit, was the same woman from the flyer. Behind her stood 3 men in bowler hats. I didn't look at the men long enough to remember their faces. I slammed the door shut and ran to the front entrance. The lock wouldn't turn. The deadbolt was frozen. I pulled at the door handle. It rattled, but the lock held. Then the deadbolt began to turn on its own slowly. deliberately, as if an invisible hand was sliding it into place. The security chain moved, too, clicking across its track. I was locked in. I screamed. My voice echoed down the empty street. No answer. I ran to the back door, also locked. The windows were painted shut. I was trapped in a 125-year-old house with a photograph of a dead woman and a shadow that had two heads. I called 911. The line rang once, then a woman's voice answered. She said, "You shouldn't have come here." Then the call dropped. I tried again. No service. I was on the second floor. The window in the bedroom looked out over the backyard slope. There was no ladder, no balcony. Yet when I turned, a handprint was pressed into the glass from the outside palm flat. Fingers spread, the outline clear against the condensation. I stared at it. The handprint was small, delicate, a woman's hand. The fingers began to move, dragging downward, leaving a trail. Then it stopped. I forced myself to look away, to breathe. I went back to the living room and sat on the floor, back pressed against the wall, phone clutched in my hands, trying to think logically. There had to be a rational explanation. The owner knew something. The reviews were fake. The house had a history no one talked about. I pulled up the Airbnb listing again. The photos looked different now. The furniture was rearranged. The walls were a different color. Though I scrolled to the reviews. There were dozens, but most were grayed out, deleted. The most recent, dated 3 weeks ago, was from a user named Guest17482. It said, "She's still here. I saw her in the mirror. She's wearing my face. The host wouldn't let me check out early. Do not book this room." The review had no response from the host. I checked the host's profile. Sandra Whitmore. Verified. 5 years hosting. 0 cancellations. I messaged her. "I need to leave. Please send the access code for the door." The message delivered. No reply. I waited 10 minutes. Nothing. I called the number listed for the property manager. It rang 4 times. Then a voicemail picked up. The recorded voice was not a woman's. It was a man's, low and slow. "If you're calling from the Bisbee property, the key is under the mat. Use it, but don't go into the 3rd bedroom." The key was there. A brass skeleton key, old, tarnished, with a ribbon tied to the bow. I grabbed it, unlocked the deadbolt, and twisted the chain. The door swung open. The street was still deserted, but now the fog had rolled in, thick and white, swallowing the porch steps. I stepped out. A cold hand closed around my wrist. Not from outside, from behind me. I turned. The woman from the flyer stood in the doorway. Her eyes were black, no iris, no white. Her mouth moved, but the sound came from inside my head. "You have my face now." I screamed, wrenched my arm free, and ran. The fog was so dense, I couldn't see 3 feet ahead. I stumbled down the steps, across the gravel driveway, onto the road. I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned. The street lamps flickered, casting jagged light. My shadow stretched ahead of me, long and distorted. But as I ran, I noticed something wrong. The shadow's arms were moving differently from mine. They were opening wide, like wings. I stopped. The shadow kept moving, then slowly turned its head. I was facing the street lamp. The shadow should have been behind me, cast forward by the light. But it was ahead of me, and it was not my shape anymore. It was taller, narrower, feminine. It raised a hand and pointed back toward the house. I turned and looked. The house was dark, every window black except one, the 3rd bedroom. A candle burned inside, and behind the glass, a silhouette stood watching me. I couldn't tell if it was the woman or myself. I made it to a gas station at the edge of town. The clerk called the police. 2 officers arrived, a man and a woman, both in their 50s, both tired. They took my statement. I told them about the mirror, the handprint, the flyer, the key. They exchanged a look. The male officer said, "Mom, that house has been vacant for 10 years. The owner died in 2014. Thank you for listening. If you're still awake, please leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to our channel. Sharing this with your friends helps others find this quiet place too. Good night. The rain will stay with you.